Hi everybody, today we're working on a 2006 Mini Cooper S. Today I'll be replacing the camshaft with a performance camshaft. I've got an engine sitting on the floor here to give you a quick preview of what we're going to do. Here's the camshaft here. It's underneath the exhaust and intake rocker arms. So we're going to need to remove all of these rocker bolts on the top here. We're going to need to take the sprocket off the front, and then we'll swap the cam and put everything back together again. And here's the new camshaft, and you're going to want to verify that it has a dowel here, which is the only thing that holds the sprocket from turning. You will need a tune to run one of these. This will give you higher lift, and car should perform really well with one of these. The new cam does have a higher lobe, so these will hit the spark plug tubes if you don't dent them. So we need to ding the tubes when we reinstall. I'll show you that a little bit later. There is one special service tool. It's the cam sprocket alignment tool. I'll put a link in the description where you can get this and any other unusual tools for this job. The first part of this job is going to be to remove the intercooler and the valve cover. And this car is a really nice aftermarket Forge Intercooler. These are really good. This is a really good mod to do for your car. This car also has a strut bar, which is a nice mod for these cars as well. We'll go ahead and start removing all this stuff. This appears to be held on by a couple 8mm bolts at the stock mounting position. And the usual Torx 30. We just slide it out. Really nice intercooler. I'll use a pair of needle nose pliers, bent pliers, to remove this hose clip. Then I'm going to get back behind here and kind of walk the hose off. This hose is very stiff, so it doesn't like to come off. And then I'm going to very carefully take this breather hose off. Just kind of get behind here and pull it off like a Chinese finger torture. This is really easy to break, so be careful. Put the hose here out of the way. I'll grab this clip here, holding on to all the breather hoses and the fuel line. Sometimes it doesn't like to come off, so we have to kind of force it off using our tool. We're going to take off the wiring for the coil pack. This one's busted and the harness is stuck onto the coil pack, so I'll just remove the coil pack. But usually all you need to do is disconnect the harness and leave the coil pack attached to the valve cover. Before doing that, I need to remove the spark plug wires, and I like to go with that same bent nose pliers, and I kind of pry them out rather than pulling on them. And again, when you do this, don't pry on this. This will break. So I pry on top of one of the other coil packs or onto the valve cover itself. And then I'll take off these 10mm bolts. Oh yeah, and don't bother with aftermarket coil packs. They don't really do anything. And actually, in some cases, the bolts that they provide are longer, and they'll punch a hole into the top of the valve cover here and cause a oil leak. Next, I'm going to remove these ears here for the intercooler. Pro tip, I like to put these on top of the intercooler so I don't forget to put them back on. So you want a nice long extension with a wobble on the bottom here, because this screw here and the bottom screw are a little bit hard to get to. There's a total of 3 screws on this arm, and they're all 8mm. Now we can remove the bolts holding on the valve cover. I think there's about 10 of them. And you're going to need an 8mm deep drive for these because of the long studs. Once you know you've loosened all of the bolts, you can take your screwdriver and just kind of pry on the corners of the valve cover. I like to pry over here in this outer corner and then over here as well, because I'm not going to damage the mating surface where the oil goes. Then you can wiggle it off and lift up. So now we can see the top of the engine, nice and clean in here. This car has 135,000 miles on it, believe it or not. You wouldn't know it by looking inside. It's had frequent oil changes. That was the easy part. Next, we need to support the engine from underneath, so we can remove this upper engine mount, and then we can remove the cam sensor, and that will let us remove the cam sprocket bolt. But first we need to put the engine in time. align it so that these two holes are faced to the top so we can put our tool on. And we also need to loosen the chain tensioner bolt, which is on the back side of the engine. It's a 19 mil bolt and it's located just behind the oil filter housing. So to give us room to reach the crank pulley to rotate the engine, I'm going to remove the right front wheel. Next, I'm going to remove these body clips to get better access to the wheel liner and get access to the crank pulley. You can actually kind of reach up in there without doing the wheel liner, but this will give us better visibility. There's about 5 or 6 of these plastic clips here, and then underneath there's going to be one metal screw. So that lets us kind of peel and fold the wheel arch, wheel liner out of the way. And then we can see the crank pulley back here. This is a 15 mil bolt, and that's what we're going to use to rotate the engine. But do not loosen that bolt until you've attached this tool, because there's a chance that the chain could skip a couple of teeth. The valves are under tension, of course, and if you rotate the engine with the tensioner loosened, there's a chance that it could cause the cam sprocket to spring forward and it might skip a tooth. So I'll grab a 15 mil socket, and then I'm going to stick it here on the crank pulley, and then I'm going to rotate the engine until the marks are almost lined up with the deck of the cylinder head. And then I'll put this tool in place. Looks like I need to go a little bit more. There we go. I'm going to back it up just a tiny bit, and then it slides right on. So now we can loosen up all the bolts. And I'll show you on this spare engine here where the timing chain bolt is. It's right here. It's almost in line with the oil filter housing. It's slightly behind it, so you're going to have to use a 19 mil socket, 6-sided socket with a wobble extension attached to it. I like to attack it coming from the top. I can't see what I'm doing, but it's much easier to do the work. You might also be able to get to it from the right front wheel well after having removed the wheel. And this bolt is really, really tight, so you're going to want a section of cheater pipe. You're going to put a lot of force on it, and it's going to go bang and come loose. So I like to attack it from the top like this, and then you stick the cheater pipe on, and then I kind of push smartly like this. And it's going to go pop, and it's going to become loose. If you do it from underneath, you're going to put on the tool like this. But honestly, I think from the top is easier because these hoses are just in the way. And like I said, make sure to use a 6-point socket. If you round this bolt off, it's going to make your life hard. So once you've got it on, put your cheater pipe on there, and then just crank it like this. And there it goes. Once you've got it started, it's pretty easy to take it off the rest of the way by hand. But ain't nobody got time for that, so I'm putting my ratcheting wrench on this. So that'll cause the bolt to fall out. And then behind it is going to be the tensioner. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to replace this while you're doing this job. It's not a big deal to replace after the fact. You can do this with the valve cover installed and even with the chain attached. Just loosen the bolt, put the new one in. If you are going to reuse it, it's pretty simple. You just put it down, press, and it'll lock into the closed position. This will pop out by itself on the first time we start the engine. Okay, so now the chain's loose, so we can remove the upper engine mount here. 13 mil to remove the ground strap. Don't forget to reinstall this or you won't be able to start the car. 18 mil for the upper mount bolt. And next we grab a floor jack to support the engine. I like to put it off to the side like this so it doesn't get in the way of my work. Then I'll put a block of wood and then gently raise the front of the engine. It only needs to come up an inch or so. If you want to raise it more, be sure to disconnect the lower engine mount. I'll just lift up enough to take the weight off of the mount. And then we loosen these 4 16 mil bolts. And take the mount out and out of the way. So this lets us get access to the cam position sensor, which is the last thing in the way before we get access to the cam sprocket bolt. And I'm going to put a bungee cord onto these hoses to keep them out of the way for your viewing pleasure. So I'll grab that 18mm socket again and we'll loosen this cam sprocket bolt now. And this is just a regular bolt, counterclockwise to loosen. This one is pretty tight, a chunk of cheater pipe helps. Once you've loosened it, you can actually remove this centering tool because it actually gets in the way of the bolt when you're taking the bolt off. I'll grab another bungee cord and I'm going to attach it here to hold the chain so that it doesn't skip any teeth on the bottom half of the engine. Then we're going to kind of walk the chain off of the sprocket, and then I'm going to keep the chain tight using the bungee cord. There's an arrow right here that shows the position where during engine assembly one of the sprockets on the chain would align here. It's probably not going to be lined up when you do the engine removal, but you can put a nail polish or whiteout or paint or something on the link that is right above this triangle, and that way you can know for sure that you got everything back together in the correct position. So you can see the position of the cam now when I had the tool attached is aligned so that the two flat edges of the cam are at about 90 degrees with the top deck of the cylinder head. Now would be a good time to also inspect the chain guides and make sure there's no damage. Everything looks good. Next, we'll loosen the 10 bolts holding the rocker arms in place, and I'm going to loosen them a little bit at a time, starting from the outside and working towards the middle. We do a little bit at a time because in this position the valve springs are under pressure. I'll show you a trick in a second how we line stuff back up when we put it back together, because it's going to be hard to keep the cam in that position. Now we can go ahead and lift up the rocker arms together with the bolts and put it someplace clean. These bolts are all the same. You don't need to worry about marking them for the correct position or whatever. These ones you do need to put in the correct position though, and it's pretty easy to accomplish this because they have little numbers. There's a mark on each one. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, with 1 being the front of the engine. So we're just going to wiggle these out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can put them out all out nice and neat, or you can just kind of lay them there like that. Doesn't really matter because they're all numbered. And then we can lift out the old cam. It just pops right out. I'll inspect this for wear. This cam has 135,000 miles on it. It looks pretty darn good. Oh, actually, I don't know if you can see that. On this one lobe here, you can see that the hardened surface has failed. All the other lobes look good. It's just that number 4 exhaust valve lobe. Looks like about 0.02 of an inch is worn off. So we're going to clean off the new cam real good. We'll clean the journals, and these all look nice and smooth. There's no deep grooves or anything like that. I'm going to clean off the journal cap area as well, because I don't want any oil stuck in there when I put things back together. Also, I'm kind of curious, what's the difference in the lift between this and the stock cam? So on this cam, the intake lift is 36.29 millimeter, and on the stock cam, it's only 35.49 millimeter. So it's a millimeter additional lift on the intake. On the exhaust side, we have 35.83 millimeters, and on the old cam, we only have 34.83 millimeters. So again, it's a 1 millimeter additional lift. If you look at the profile of the cam, you can see it looks like the intake has a longer duration and the exhaust looks maybe a little bit longer lift. So yeah, this should perform pretty differently. All right, before reassembling, I'm going to use some engine assembly lube, and I'm going to lube the journals. I'll do this on the bottom and the top as well, just to avoid any startup friction. Just a little dot for each journal. I'll show you now the spark plug tubes. When it's in place, there's barely any room here between the exhaust lobes and the spark plug tube. It looks like they are not touching right now, but they're really, really close. And when the metal expands, there's a chance that there could be some contact. So we're going to have to ding each of these tubes. I'm going to mark the approximate location with a magic marker for each tube of closest approach. And then use a ball peen hammer to hit right there. Don't go overboard, because then your spark plug socket won't be able to get down the tube. We'll fit the cam in one more time and verify that we have improved clearance. And yeah, it looks like we have another 1 or 2 thousandths additional clearance, so that's good. So next I'm going to line up the cam approximately where it should be. Then I'm going to grab the cam sprocket bolt and clean this off, or use a new bolt. I'll make sure it's clean, and then apply some blue Loctite to the bolt to prevent it from backing out. And this is really cool. I found some gel twist blue Loctite, which is totally awesome. It doesn't dry out and clog up the tube like the liquid stuff does. I'll put a link in the description. So like I said earlier, to avoid this thing coming out of alignment, I'm going to put the bolt back in now, so I need to put the chain back on to the sprocket here, and then I'm going to put my alignment tool back in place. And if everything slides back on, then you know you got it right. But I can't get the bolt on with the alignment tool in place, so I'm going to pull the tool back off, grab the bolt, just hand tight is fine for now. Don't put the tensioner back in yet, or it's going to torque the front end of the camshaft and the back end's going to come up. And then I'm going to put another little dot of assembly lube, and then we'll reattach all the cam journals. So this is number 2, goes here. Number 3 goes here. Number 1 goes here. Number 5 goes here. And number 4 goes here. Make sure that they go all the way down and they're not stuck on the little alignment dowel. Then we're going to take all the bolts out and we're going to grab the rocker arms. And this part's a little bit challenging. We need to get the rocker arms over the spark plug tubes. They like to kind of rotate down. It's a little bit frustrating, but you just kind of coax them into their positions. And you want to be very careful when you do this. You don't want to break off any of the hydraulic lash adjusters. And there's a little flat spot on the tube, and you want to make sure that's rotated toward the spark plug tubes. And then you got to move the rocker arms to the side so they clear the journals. And when it's all lined up, the tube should kind of rest in place. So here's one of these rocker arms, and the reason you want to be careful, you can see here the hydraulic adjuster. It's got a little universal seat here, and it's just being held in by this nylon plastic. And if you catch it on the edge of something like that, it's very easy to break this nylon plastic, and then this little metal piece will go into the top of your cylinder head. So you just want to be super careful not to damage that. These are pretty easy to find used. You don't need to buy a certain size or anything like that. If you do break one, I'll put a link in the description where you can grab replacements. Used are probably fine. These things last a long time. Anyway, now that we've got everything lined up, you can check and make sure that the rocker arms are not catching the edge of one of the valve stems and the tubes are aligned properly. You can go ahead and put in the bolts. Make sure to clean all the oil off of these, of course. Well, not all the oil. You just need to get the excess oil off so you don't get any stuck down in the engine. And we'll repeat with the exhaust side, and this side's really easy compared to the intake side. There we go. And we'll tighten these down just snug. Again, working from the inside out. And once you've gotten them down, you can tighten the rest of the way to the torque value, which I'm putting on the screen here. And don't blindly follow your torque wrench. Make sure you don't mix up inch pounds and foot pounds, and use your brain. If it feels like it's too tight, it might be. So those are all tight now. Next, we'll tighten the camshaft sprocket. And this bolt should be this tight. And you want to make sure this bolt's tight. You don't want it to back out, but don't over tighten it and stretch it either. So now that that's all done, we can put the tensioner back in. This should be pretty easy to put in because the tensioner is compressed now. And we'll tighten the same as how we loosened. It's kind of hard to get torque there, so I like to use the cheater bar to tighten as well. That's about tight enough. And now that everything's tightened up, we can take off our alignment tool. Next, we'll put the cam position sensor back in place. Then we can reinstall the engine mount. Lower the engine back onto the mount. Reattach the ground strap and the 18 mil nut. Next, we'll put a new gasket on the valve cover. I'll just pry out the old gasket. And typically you don't need to replace the spark plug tubes, because even if those leak, it just goes right back into the crankcase. We just kind of squish the gasket in place, and you don't need any RTV at all for this. Now we can put the valve cover back in place, and you want to make sure you clear all the wiring and stuff. This one on the front here tends to get stuck. And we'll tighten down all these 8mm bolts from the inside out. I'll reconnect the little clip here for the various tubes. Reinstall the coil pack. we'll put the spark plug wires back in, and you want to push down until you hear it click. Number 3 goes here, number 4 goes here. Reinstall these intercooler ears. I like to start the bottom bolt first. And I just get them started. I don't tighten any of them until I've gotten at least all 3 of them started. Once you've got those in, we can put the tubes back in place. Then we can put the intercooler boot clamps back in and make sure the threaded one goes on the bottom and the non-threaded one goes on top. You get them backwards, you got to do it all over. And be sure that the lip of the gasket clears the clamp, otherwise you'll get a air leak. Slide the intercooler in, starting from the big side, and then push it in on the other side. I like to use a round shank screwdriver to get this going the rest of the way on. It helps to spray a little bit of a spray silicone on this, and then you just kind of work it on. Push towards the right side of the car so that you've got more room. There it goes. Then slide it back to the center position. We'll reposition the smaller side boot clamp. Start the screws by hand. And then I'll put these 8mm bolts in first to make sure that they line up. And then I'll tighten the boot clamps. The rest of the job is pretty simple, reattaching the wheel arch and putting the wheel back on. So I won't bore you showing that, but you get the idea. And we'll start the car up and see how it does. It starts up just fine. I think it sounds a little more throaty than it did before. But anyway, that's how to replace the camshaft on a 2002 to 2006 Mini Cooper. Be sure to check the links for the parts and the tools. Let me know if you have any questions. Share, like, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.